Hello. Welcome back to Ask a Violet Guide, where we answer your questions about things that are worrying you in your role as a caregiver for a person who's in or nearing the last stage of life. This week, we look again at a question which we began with last week around communication at the end of life. Our caregiver asked, I worry that talking about death and what might happen will just make things worse. How does communication at the end of life really make things better? Last week we looked at why we all find it so incredibly hard to talk about death and dying, particularly when it involves those who are close to us and those we love dearly. This week we'll look at how, if we can find the courage to have open and honest communication at the end of life, the experience for both you as a caregiver and the person whom you're caring for will be greatly improved. All of our Violet Guides have had at least one experience of caring for a person they love at the end of life. And while all those experiences have been very different, there's one thing that we guides all agree on, and that's the need for honest and open communication. If your loved one, of course, is willing. It will make things better for the person you are caring for and for you as the caregiver, both now, while you're in that caring role, and after your loved one has died. Hopefully you will look back and be proud, having somehow found the courage to put your own fears aside and be willing to communicate with your loved one. Attitudes to communication in the last stage of life can be viewed as being on a continuum, from those who, when in the last stage of life, do not under any circumstances whatsoever want to talk about it. Some people refer to this as being in denial, and that may be the case, and that's certainly a choice that people can make, and that must be respected. We can't make people talk about things that they do not wish to entertain. On the other end of the spectrum, however, are those who want to know exactly what is going to happen, what's ahead, and they are really keen to talk about it a lot and to understand and plan for what's ahead. Talking at the end of life can also help people to make meaning and validate their life. We spend all our lives striving to learn and to do good and to achieve. Surely we deserve some time at the end of our lives for review and validation and looking back once we're at the end of that journey. Talking can also help people to make peace and to facilitate saying goodbye. In addition, it can also help clarify end-of-life celebrations and legacy. It's important to talk about how the person's life will be portrayed in an end-of-life celebration. It might be important to some people to say how they want their funeral service to be, what music they like, who would speak, and those sorts of things. It's interesting that many people do wonderful things in terms of legacy, for example, giving money for scholarships and so forth. Recently, I attended such an event, and at the presentation of the scholarship for an up-and-coming opera singer to have further training overseas, I couldn't help thinking that what a shame it was that the benefactor wasn't actually in the room with us. He really would have loved the occasion and certainly been proud of his legacy. Perhaps that's something we need to think about. Talking with your loved one whom you're caring for, who's in the last stage of life, can also facilitate connection and intimacy. At the end of life, it really doesn't matter what car you drive or where you went to school or what job that you did. What really matters is the relationships that you have with those around you. By learning to be present with your loved one, you can experience deep connection and intimacy by being completely honest, not necessarily even speaking or jumping in with advice, but just being with your loved one with an open heart and a listening ear. You can help them feel at peace with what is happening. Talking can also clarify what's important to the dying person, and their family can then make the most of the time that they have together. Through conversations, thanks can be given, wrongs can be righted, forgiveness can be sought, and worries and fears shared. Talking about death and dying can also help the person and their family face reality and learn about what's ahead, what to be concerned about, when to get help, or when to just quietly sit together in that moment. In this way, we can help to reduce fear and to give more choice and control to those involved. And so if communication does occur, the chaos that often occurs at the end of life can, to some extent, be avoided. It's very difficult if conversations haven't occurred between family members and the person who's at the end of life. And if that's the case, something may occur and decisions may need to be made in a crisis. And they may not be the decisions that the person who is in the last stage of life might have made if they'd had more time to think about it and they'd had those choices earlier. For example, it may be that a person in an aged care facility is very clear that at the end of life, should they become unwell and be closer to their end of life, they want to stay in the home where they live with those around them who know them well and care for them on a daily basis, knowing exactly how to do that and what the person prefers. They may prefer that rather than being rushed off to hospital. This needs to be discussed before the crisis situation arises so that it's easier for everybody to manage in that situation. Talking about death and dying can also help people to move towards accepting what is ahead. It's really difficult, as we discussed last week, to face our mortality, but it is inevitable, so that if you're caring for the sort of person who wants to completely understand what's happening and what's ahead, help them to speak about their worries and their fears, their goals and their values, so that they can free some space to be ready and to say goodbye. It's hard to imagine, actually, that a person can really be ready to die, but it does indeed happen. And in that situation, family and friends can take great solace in knowing that they helped their loved one to accept what was ahead and allowed them to say and do all that was needed before they died. So, I hope after that long list, I have managed to convince you that as long as your loved one is willing, honest and open communication with them at the end of their life is indeed worthwhile, and it will make things better rather than worse for all those involved. Next week, we'll talk about how to start those conversations and how to be present with your loved one so that they can say and do the things that are important to them, making the most of the time that you all have together before they need to say goodbye. I look forward to seeing you then, and in the meantime, if you're caring for a loved one in the last stages of life and you need someone to talk to, contact our Violet Guides. You can do this through the Violet website, or you can call 1-800-VIOLET. Look forward to seeing you next week. Bye for now.